Top of the morning. Just want to touch on a couple of things. First of all, Rob Griggs is a friend of mine, a guy who performed the wedding ceremony for my wife and I, was my wife's youth pastor, and kind of plays a coaching role for me as we lead Narrate. And he's been here a couple times before in the past. He'll be here next weekend. You'll want to fire me after next weekend and hire him. He's that good. So encourage you to... I guess I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that I know some of you will have family and stuff, and so I want you to know there will be a guest communicator, and he hits the ball out of the park. It'll be stellar. If you're a guest, welcome. My leash is not long enough, sorry. We're delighted that you're here. We are a church, as you might have guessed, who likes to gather and scatter. Our conviction is that Jesus is who he says that he is, that the cross brings redemption and salvation. And yet we're constantly trying to remind ourselves that the point of decision isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. And that Jesus' movement wasn't intended to be about me or about you, but about others, even all the way back to Abraham. I'll bless you so you can be a blessing to others. And so we're constantly trying to matter, is what that means. As a community, we're constantly reminding ourselves that this is 1/7 of what it means to be the church, and the opportunities afforded us in our neighborhoods and schools and workplaces and all of those things. That's where the real work and real opportunity lies. So we're thrilled that you're here and would love to have conversations with you. If you have some questions, you'll find people with Ask Me lanyards around their neck. They know everything, including the age of the earth. So feel free to ask them any questions you might have. So yeah, there's that. I also want to touch on the Christmas tree thing, because all of that to say, so the Christmas tree is this unique opportunity that the city gave us a couple years ago. They approached us and said, hey, we thin trees all the time. Could we turn those into Christmas trees for single mothers and the working poor and people who otherwise might not have a Christmas tree? And so we've taken the lead now for a couple of years on organizing all that. We put stands and lights together through our own budget, and so people get to deliver those to friends and family who need a tree. So there's two opportunities there for you on the scattering end. One is we need names, and preferably, we don't want all the trees to go to Narrate people. We'll give them to Narrate people, but we're thinking friends, coworkers, people in your life, in the fabric of your day that could benefit from a tree. So if you'd let us know that, email, info card, all that. We did 25-ish last year, I believe, 30, I can't remember exactly, and I think we're getting 40 trees this year. So we need your help, otherwise we kill the forest without any good reason for it. Just kidding. And then also, if you want to deliver a tree, there's these opportunities, and I think it's a remarkable opportunity, where you and your wife, or you and your friend, or you and your kids after dinner just go to a designated location, grab a Christmas tree and a stand, and show up at some gal's house or some family's house and set up a tree and then run out the door before it falls over. Okay, I want to pray actually before we jump in this morning. God, this morning's kind of heavier stuff than maybe we're used to, and so I pray that you would cover this time. I pray that you'd cover our hearts. I pray that you'd give us wisdom and understanding and discernment, that your Spirit would guide us as we process this. God, we're sincere in our desire to know and follow you. And this topic of criticism is pretty central in what can help life go really, really well or go really, really sideways. We love you, Jesus. Amen. So, if you've not been with us before or recently, we started a series several weeks ago called Attitude Check. It was based upon the observation that I have a bad attitude and that I have friends that tend to have bad attitudes. And so we said, let's have this conversation where we consider our attitudes and the invitation of Jesus to live our lives with a certain kind of attitude, irrespective of what's going on around us. And throughout the series, what we've done is consider our attitude to be like a muscle, right? A muscle can be in shape, it can be out of shape, it can be healthy, it can be unhealthy. And we've said, what if you don't just grunt your way into a good attitude? What if there are exercises you can do behind the scenes, so to speak, that actually grow or build or strengthen, enhance, Botox for your attitude, perhaps? And so we've talked about several exercises to that end. We talked about feeding our minds good stuff, the fact that our minds have a metabolism and it consumes whether we like it or not, and so the place of feeding our minds good stuff and how that fleshes out in our attitude. We talked about our words and how our words don't just reflect our hearts, but they form our reality. Sticks and stones can break your bones, but names can never hurt you, right? We went bogus. Like, words matter. And they don't just shape other people's lives, they shape our own. And so we had this conversation about that. And then last week, Lindsay was here. And we just talked about the science of exercise and how exercise can actually impact our attitudes. And I loved it because it kind of went another step further towards recognizing that science is God's domain too. And as Christ followers, we're not called to fear it, but embrace it and learn from it as we understand his world. So if you missed last week, there was that too. This morning, we're going to deviate from that path a bit. And here's why. This summer, this series was born in me this summer. largely from a book from Tim Sanders, which is a phenomenal book. He's a Christ follower who has put together some intense studies on how we can understand our attitude. And it's very easy to see how they coincide with the teaching of Scripture. And so this summer, as I was kind of working on that myself and then made the observation, like, I think this could be really, really relevant in the lives of people. And by the way, I don't know that we've ever had as much positive feedback from a series as we have from this one, and thank you. So as I was processing all that this summer, I was then listening to a podcast. It was actually an interview of a guy named Perry Noble, who leads a church and a movement in the southeast part of the United States. And the title of the interview was The Evolution of Criticism. And to be sure, it was really pointed towards leaders in the church today and dealing with criticism. And so listening to this in August, it occurred to me that the relevance of this conversation in a series about attitude. Because to be sure, we've spent the last few weeks focusing on our minds and our words and keeping things positive, right? Saying positive things, not saying the negative things, thinking positive thoughts, turning our brains so that we can actually think about the things we can control. It was all this very, very positive thing, which is relevant and I think life-changing. But what occurred to me in all of that, running along the trail on Mount Ascension someday in August, was, whoa, wait a minute. Criticism has to be part of the conversation. And it would be an error to come out of this season saying that there's never that it's never appropriate to challenge someone, to confront someone, to call someone out. I don't know what kind of words you use for that, right? But as a person, there's going to be moments in your life where you need someone to challenge you, right? You need someone to say some tough stuff, and we'll talk about what qualifies and disqualifies a person to be that person. Right, like there's going to be times as a spouse, as an employee, as a friend, as a community member, as a citizen, as a Christ follower, as a parent, where you're going to need someone who loves you enough to go, wait a minute, there's this spot, there's this blind spot in your heart, and I think God's asking me to talk to you about it. And likewise, there's going to be times in our lives when God calls upon us as friends and spouses and employees and community members and all of those different roles that we play in life. There's going to be times where the most loving thing we can do is sit down with someone and share some less than positive words, right? Where we offer some criticism. And of course, we're hoping for a good outcome. But I guess it occurred to me way back then, this summer then, the importance of going, okay, but we got to talk about when it's appropriate to be critical then. Otherwise, we miss a whole aspect of the human scene. And so what I want to do this morning is put this idea of criticism on the table. Because I know it's scary at times, and it's frustrating, and we have bad memories where we've confronted, and memories where we've been confronted, and it brings up all kinds of emotions, and I just want to put it on the table. And in no way do I have the sense that I have the final word on criticism. I just want to stimulate your thinking and look at the Scriptures. And really, my goal for you this morning is that I could be a catalyst to a conversation in your heart and in your head about criticism boundaries, where you would leave this morning with a greater understanding of who has permission in your life to play that role and who doesn't. And when does God say, stop, shut your mouth and listen? And when does God say, turn it off, close the website, whatever it is, move on with your life? And likewise, when does God call to be the person that offers criticism, and when does he not call you to do so? Like, have you ever been criticized? Have you ever been criticized unfairly? Timing wasn't right, context wasn't right, who it wasn't right. Like, ever been criticized and it just, something about you felt defiled? Like something about it just wasn't right. Have you ever been criticized and it wasn't accurate? Like they didn't have all the information, they only had half the story. Like you've heard from your grandma that a pancake has two sides, no matter how flat it is, there's still two sides, right? Ever been criticized in a way that wasn't fair? And you didn't have a chance to share your side of the story? Ever been there? Ever responded to criticism negatively? And I guess by negative, I mean, have you ever responded defensively? Like in hindsight, the next day, the next month, today, you're going, oh man, they meant well by that coach, that friend, that parent, that spouse. When they went there, they had the best of intentions, and in fact, I think they were right, but I came out like a grizzly bear. Ever been there? I know that all the males have for sure. Right? Because we're prone to getting this cornered feeling and we just lash out. Ever been criticized well? And I know that those two words don't go together very often, but by well, I mean, have you ever been criticized in such a way that you look back and you go, man, I'm a better person because of that. So grateful that she called me on it. I was thinking this week about this whole concept of being criticized well, and I was reminded that right before moving here to Helena, my dad, who's not the confrontational type, pulled me aside kind of. I guess pulled me aside isn't accurate at all. We was kind of in passing. We were living with them at the time because our house sold 6 months too early, which is a good problem to have when you're selling a house, but nonetheless, we lived with them for 6 months. And he said to me one day, Adam, when you get to Helena, you're going to have to be better about changing your plans. Like when death happens, when tragedy occurs in people's lives, you're going to have to be better about changing your schedule and putting down your priorities and taking care of people. He's not a pastor. He's never pastored, and yet he, in hindsight, was looking at me, understanding that I have a weakness, and it's that I get kind of locked onto a to-do list and a schedule, and even interruptions like deaths can cause me to go don't have time for that. And in fact, the context of his saying that was the fact that I created a lot of relational strife in my own family because about 7 months prior to that, my brother-in-law, his mom had a heart condition and she died in her sleep. I was running when my sister tried to call me, and when I finally got in my car to go to work, I had missed 17 phone calls. I'm not a genius, but I understand that I missed something important. By the time I tried to call her back, I had missed her call, and she was frustrated that I wasn't there for her then. But then what made it really, really complicated was that week was a pretty important week because that Saturday they scheduled the funeral. That Sunday, our house was going on the market, started with an open house. And if you've ever sold a house, you know that there's a couple things stressful in life, dying and selling a house, right? And so weeks before, we'd rallied a bunch of friends to kind of converge on our house that Saturday. It was a 900-square-foot house, 3 boys under 5 years old. My wife was working that day. We kind of rallied our circle of friends to help us clean, right? Touching up paint and toothbrushes and all that stuff because the place needed to shine the next day. For after all, we needed to move to Helena, and it'd be nice to not own this house when we lived there. And so I had this dilemma on my hands. There's a funeral for my brother-in-law's mom, and yet I've got all my friends coming over to the house, and we need to clean. And that morning, I can still remember looking at a friend of mine, and she said, Adam, just go. It'll be fine. We'll clean your house. And I was like, I'm not going to leave my friends cleaning my house and, go eat a piece of celery at a funeral. I'm not going to do it. And in hindsight, I didn't do it. And it was a mistake. And that's what my dad was saying to me was, that was wrong. You screwed up there. And I was reminded of all that this week because, as you know, if you were here last week, I talked about how a family from Narrate had tragedy strike their life. And when we got the phone call from that, it was 7 o'clock in the morning on Monday. We were on our way to Gillette for some meetings. And, the staff doesn't usually hang out at 7 o'clock in the morning on Monday, but we all happened to be in the same car, and the phone rang, and we got the news, and we all had this sense of, now what do we do? What do we do now? And, of course, we knew that they were going to need our help, and we also knew that we were expected to be in Gillette, and there was all this stuff going on. And so in order to buy time, I said, well, we got to get gas either way. And so we drove to the gas station, and the staff they wouldn't even make eye contact with me. They just kind of were looking ahead, what do you guys want to do? And they were just I don't know. We were all out of context. And I remember I got gas, and I got back in the car, and the memory that had hit my head was my dad saying that to me. And I said to him, you guys, I've made a mistake here before. And it was a big mistake. And so I don't know if we're going to Gillette or not, but we need to get out there and we need to figure out what they need. That's not to brag, but it's just to bring back those memories of we all have them, don't we? We need criticism in our lives. We need people to challenge us. We need people to correct us. We need people to call us on stuff. Because we know we're broken. We know that we're prone towards sin. We know that we screw up. We know that we make decisions that harm ourselves and harm others. We know that we could follow Jesus better. We know that we could be more obedient. We know we could be better employees. We could be better stewards. We could be better budgeters. We could be better volunteers. We know that, right? Does anybody here really think they're perfect? I don't. You don't. I don't know anybody who thinks they're perfect. Do you? We understand that we need criticism. And yet if we know that we're broken, and we know we need help, and we know we're going to need people to call us on stuff, why then are we so afraid of criticism? Why does our skin curl a little bit, crawl a little bit when we think about criticism? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because of the intro, is it not? It's because of what we talked about a few minutes ago. It's because we've been beat up, we've been abused, we've been taken advantage of, we've been manipulated, we've been hurt. This is why. And so this morning I want to just talk about boundaries. That's only half of it though, right? Because we also understand that sometimes we're going to be called to criticize. Ever criticize someone? Ever criticize someone unfairly? Inaccurately? Ever offered someone criticism and you know that you were right? You still know you were right. And yet they responded in such a way that you don't talk anymore. There's this weird blinder between you and them. I mean, you still sit at the same Thanksgiving table, but there's just something not there anymore. It creates a fear, doesn't it? An anxiety, like, when do I know whether or not I'm supposed to criticize? Ever had something in your heart for someone that you really do love? There really are tears in your eyes that there's this blind spot in their life and you'd love to talk to them about it, but your past experiences are such that you're like, no way. Lost a friend, family's all weird now, not going there anymore. Fortunately, we have the Bible. Fortunately, we have a God who loves us so much that he says, hey, I'm going to give you this book, and it's going to help you know me. And on this issue of criticism, I think God offers us some tremendous wisdom. And it starts by this, and this is counterintuitive. You've probably never thought in these terms before, but God makes it really clear you're going to need friends who will wound you. You're going to need friends who are willing to be friends enough to say stuff to you that they can't guarantee or control your reaction, but it needs to be said. In the Proverbs, it said this way, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Now, this is this very foreign, very weird concept, because what the author is saying is he's contrasting real friends with fake friends, and to be sure, he's saying your real friends are the ones that wound you. And he's not talking about mistakes, he's not talking about error. Scholars that I've looked into here, they agree he's talking about wounds that come in the form of criticism and correction. And so the author is saying you're going to need people in your life who hurt you, who have the guts to say that hard stuff. In fact, when it comes to the economy of friendship, he is saying friends who just pat you on the butt all the time and tell you how awesome you are, and really they don't do that, right? What we know that they do is they say it when you're not looking and when you're not listening and when you're not there. No one really thinks we're as great as we think they do. It's just an issue of whether or not anyway, right? Those friends he's contrasting with the ones who will say it. Not that they develop a habit of saying it, not that they say it every time, not that 90 times out of 100 they say something negative to you, but he's contrasting those. In fact, elsewhere in the Proverbs, the text says a refusal to correct is a refusal to love. It goes on to say, love your children by disciplining them. But it's not just a parenting verse, is it? It's this reminder of we need friends who will correct us. And why? Well, because we're going to have some really dumb ideas. We're going to have some really, really stupid ideas in our lives. I'm finding out that one of them might be that bungee trampoline thing that we talked about on Vision Weekend. Might be a dumb idea. The jury's still out on how dumb of an idea it is, but insurance companies apparently think it's a really dumb idea. Proverbs say this, plans fail for a lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Elsewhere it says, form your purpose by asking for counsel. You're going to need friends who you bounce your ideas off of, because some of your ideas, they're going to be far from brilliant. The way this fleshes out in my life, because what I love about leadership and this is ideas. I love the idea part of all of this, and so there's a couple teams in my life and in our life as a church that help us with the idea thing. The first is a leadership team that's comprised of the staff, and we meet first and third Wednesday of every month, and the agenda is made up of ideas. Things like Ales for Trails and dodgeball tournament, those types of things end up on there, and it's the first chance to kind of go like, hey guys, what do you think? Sometimes much simpler stuff. The other one is our church council. It's made up of guys with varying strengths, and they're not there to create the vision. They're there to offer counsel, to offer wisdom, and so we're throwing ideas. I'm throwing ideas on the table, and they're going dumb, 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 good, dumb, good. And it's not a negative environment at all, but the design of it is to recognize like, whoa, wait a minute, we got to bounce some ideas off each other. I was thinking this week, when I was 21 years old, I fallen madly in love with this girl named Teresa. Been there? Not with Teresa, but right, you've been there. Problem was, I knew myself, and I knew that I've got a bad track record with relationships, and I sat down with my friend Fred, who had been discipling me for months, and I said, Fred, I'm thinking about asking Teresa to marry me. We've only been dating for 9 months. He said, what do you do if I say no? I said, I won't do it. Now, what was he teaching me there that he had me under his thumb? No, can't totally tell you his motive. I'll tell you what I learned from it. Adam, I don't care how much you read your Bible. I don't care how godly you are. I don't care how much you pray. I don't care about any of that stuff. You're going to have some dumb ideas. There better be friends in your life who can go, that's dumb. Don't do it. Another dumb idea, if you were to pull up the original vision paperwork from this whole deal, this church plant, I would date back to a class I took in 2007 at George Fox, and on there, I need to pull it up and just reread it so I could laugh. On there, one of the ideas on there is that on Sunday night, this church that eventually came to be called Narrate, we would have a Sunday night service, and we would strip it down, and we would have less music, and we'd just kind of teach the word, and we'd drink coffee, and we'd put up a big screen, and we'd watch Sunday Night Football when we were done, and we'd just kind of hang out. But the catch there is we would have that, and this is in the document, it would be at the cathedral. I still think it's a great idea. And it's not saying anything about Catholicism. In fact, quite to the contrary. But now that I'm here and I understand the culture, I understand, dream on, moron. It's not going to happen, right? We're going to have some bad ideas. And in fact, the scriptures go a step further. And they say you're not just going to have bad ideas. You're going to have some sinful ideas. Some twisted ideas. Some destructive ideas. You're going to have some ideas that are not just bad. They're anti-God and his will. In Romans, Paul says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. His point there isn't to beat us down. His point there is to say that as a human, you have a tendency, you're broken. You sin. In Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? Even the Apostle Paul at one point, he talks, I believe it's in Corinthians, he's talking about some guys who were chipping at him and criticizing him, and he's talking to his friends at the church, and he's going, hey, my conscience is clear. And then he goes, but I don't know, I guess I'll have to wait for the judgment to find out if I'm right. He understood that some of his ideas, he wouldn't maybe know until judgment. And it's why in Galatians 6, he says to this band of believers, hey, brothers and sisters, if someone's caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. Because we're going to need people who say, that's sin, dude. You need help with that. But watch yourselves or you'll also be tempted. But here's the catch. And here's what I think makes it so complicated and so confusing and so frustrating, and why we all kind of go I'll just kind of avoid this in my life. I'll be anti-conflict, and I'm not going to call out on any of my friends, and God will have to speak to them through someone other than me. Here's why. Because the scriptures also make it clear that your friends won't always be correct. Sometimes really godly people will confront you, and they'll challenge you, and they'll be wrong. Think of Job. Right? The poor sap. A guy who had it all going on and was so faithful to God that he became a part of this weird thing between God and Satan. And I'm not going to get into the nuances and the theology of that. But if you're not familiar with the story, Job became completely stripped down, even from his health. And it was because God so trusted that Job loved him and would continue to remain faithful to him. I used to have a kid in the youth group in Billings that would say to people when something bad happened, you've been Jobbed. You've been Jobbed. And Job, as he was living this out and staying faithful to God, what happened to him? His friends showed up and they started chipping at him. And they started saying, you sinned. That's why this is happening to you. You're outside of God's will. That's why this is going on. And guess what? They were wrong. And Job had an experience where God showed up and confirmed to him that he was wrong. But I think we miss the tension of that when we read it because we miss the lifespan of it all, the exhaustion of it all, the hours he spent rolling around in bed wondering if his critics, his friends, were right or if they were wrong. Think of Jesus. How tragic if he would have thought that his friends were always right. There'd be no cross. There'd be no redemption. There'd be no forgiveness of sins through grace. Because his best friend, Peter, one of his best friends, was very persistent. You can't go to the cross. And Jesus eventually had to say to him, get behind me, Satan. And this is why this thing is so complicated, is it not? When do I offer criticism because I might not be right anyway? And when do I listen to it because they might not be right anyway? And how do we navigate all of this? Here's my little principle born out of this summer and studying that for the last several months. It's simply this: hire friends and fire critics. Hire friends means welcome the criticism of friends. Consider the criticism of friends, and fire the criticism of critics. Not to be confused, by the way, with surround yourself with yes people. Because as we've already talked about, friends, they're not the people who just tell you what you want to hear all the time. They're the people who at times love you enough to challenge you. Hire friends, fire critics. Which raises the question, so who's a friend and who's a critic? And here I'm indebted to Perry Noble because he put together what I think is a fantastic list as we try to navigate this. I'm going to power through. There's 6 of these. There's notes pages on the heat registers, and if they're gone, which it looks like they might be, email us and we'll email it to you. But 6 things. Number 1, a friend has a relationship with you. A critic doesn't even know you. A friend walks with you. A critic is just an outside observer of your life, and they don't know much about you. 2, a friend believes the best about you. A critic assumes the worst. High view, low view. 3, a friend corrects out of love. A critic's master ambition is to be right. A friend, it's about love. A critic, it's typically about something intellectual. It's about something factual. It's really not about people at all. It's about these facts. They don't care about you. They just have this gross need. It's called pride in the Bible, to be right. Number 4, a friend has earned your respect. A critic has not. Number 5, a friend handles things privately, and a critic goes public. The Bible calls this slander. It calls it gossip. A friend, they come to you. And in the secrecy of your relationship, in the protection of a one-on-one conversation, a friend offers critique. A critic critiques you through relationships, critiques you through other means, not eyeball to eyeball. And number 6, a friend loves you through disagreement. You don't lose a friend in the midst of confrontation. A critic hates you no matter what you do. So when it comes to criticism and navigating criticism, how do we know whose we're supposed to hear and whose we're not? Let's just be clear. The Bible says a lot about criticism. There's a lot of examples. Paul's saying things like, I'm turning you over to Satan. I'm turning them over to Satan. Interesting thing is he said that once about them, and then he moved on. And the other interesting thing is when the Bible talks about criticism, it's talking about it in the context of relationship. When he says to the Galatians, call each other on your stuff, he's not saying to one stranger to confront another stranger. He's saying to a group of people, hey, help each other, correct each other. So who are your friends? And one of my challenges, maybe the sole piece of application in the immediate that I would have for you this morning, is hire some friends. And don't assume that they know they're hired. Get eyeball to eyeball with 3 or 4 people. I did it this week with 4 or 5 dudes in my life and went, okay. And they're not the only ones that have the permission, but nonetheless I went, okay. You know you've got the permission, right? And not only the permission, you know that I'm relying upon you to point out blind spots, right? Who do you need to hire? Who are the people that you know love you and love Jesus and love the vision and the goals of your life? Who do you just need to reaffirm to them, hey, I need you. I'm relying upon you. I'm not so naive as to think I'm perfect and that my theology and my doctrine's perfect or any of that stuff. I need you to help me. Hire some friends. And conversely, who do you need to fire? Who are the people that you go like, nope. My friend Vern says any criticism that falls under ungodly and inaccurate doesn't even merit a response. If it's ungodly and inaccurate, ungodly in the way it's handled, inaccurate in the facts, it doesn't even deserve your response. And it's hard to fire your boss, so you might have to do some creative gymnastics in the application of this. Probably don't want to fire your spouse. But I would say at the very least, maybe you turn and return the challenge to them like, hey, are you for me or against me? Because it feels to me like you're against me. Because a friend, when they confront you, they have a tear in their eye, not a smile on their face. Who do you need to fire? Who do you need to just go like, I'm not going to listen? Or to just flat say like, you know what, you don't have permission. Or turn it off, shut it down. Who do you need to fire? And then as you consider as a friend and a Christ follower and a disciple and an employee and a boss, and you consider those questions, who are my friends? Who do I have permission to confront? I think when you ask that question, you reveal a great deal of emotional, spiritual intelligence. Because when you ask the question, do I have permission relationally, then you show a great deal of maturity. Because that's the issue. In the Bible, confrontation is a relational thing, just like everything is a relational thing. And then I want to land here, because I recognize that for some of you, you're trafficking with us and becoming a part of the Narrate culture, and you're still not sure what you're going to do with Jesus. You're still not sure what to think. You're still not sure what to believe. You're still not sure what it means to follow him, and that's fine. We purposely are creating a culture that you can explore that, and we're proud to be that for you. But I think on this topic of criticism, we can talk about Jesus pretty directly, because I think for many of us, we understand Jesus and the gospel to be something that says God hates you. And if it weren't for Jesus dying on the cross, he would go on hating you. But when Jesus died on the cross, that somehow confronted God, and he could no longer hate you anymore, but now he has to like you if you raise your hand on church some Sunday. And it's really important to me that you would understand that's not God's message. Paul says it's your kindness. It's God's kindness that draws us to repentance. John, Jesus' best friend, said, hey, while you were still a sinner, Christ died for you. Were you created to have a relationship with God? Yes. Do we screw that up through our own decision-making, something that we call sin? Yes. Does that earn us separation from God relationally? Yes. Does God live with a posture of hatred towards you? No. There's a consequence? Yes. But the prodigal father in the Gospel of Luke shows us God's attitude towards you, where he is eager for God to embrace them. He's not opposed to you. He doesn't somehow revel in your failure. He's your biggest fan. And the moment that you receive and believe, then God welcomes you in. It's important to me that you understand that God does not live with a perpetually critical view of you. Critical of your sin, yes. And the gospel's not limited to you. It's both the good news and the bad news about Jesus. He's madly in love with you. He desperately wants to redeem you and restore you to relationship with himself. But the goal of Jesus' movement isn't you and it's not me. It's always others. God's grace always is supposed to move through us towards others. The gospel is as old as Genesis, where God says, I am committed to putting things back together, to bringing people back into relationship with me and putting things back to rights. And it starts with individuals, and it moves through communities, and it becomes about others. I guess I want to say all that to say maybe this morning, maybe you want to begin a journey by saying, Jesus, I'm yours. That decision's not the end goal that Jesus has for you. It's the beginning. And God, he's passionate about you. Eager for you to receive his grace. And just as eager to transform you and use you to reach others, to serve others. If that's where you're at, I just invite you to communicate that to God as I pray. I'm going to pray and close this up, and we'll go on. God, this criticism stuff it's wild. It's frustrating. There's people here this morning that have lost relationships because of criticism gone bad. There's people here this morning who dislike you because of criticism that's gone bad and the way it was handled. There's people here, God, who have been beat up and bruised in any number of ways because of criticism. And yet, God, we recognize that it's a central piece of the way you call people to love you and to love each other. And so would you help us be wise in this? Help us understand the boundaries you give us. And help us understand the boundaries you give others. Thanks, God, for this season of wrestling with our attitudes, and thanks for guys like Tim Sanders who help us understand the scriptures all the more. God, we're real grateful. We know we're broken. We know we need help. Would you provide it in a timely, receivable fashion? People here this morning embracing you for the very first time, thanks, God, for your grace. Thanks for the invitation to be your disciple. Thanks for the opportunity for our lives not to be about ourselves. We love you, Jesus.